All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Gridiron Gurus podcast. Today, me and Nick here are going to be dissecting some free agent moves done by the new. I almost said New England. Oh my God. Let me start over. All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Gridiron Gurus podcast. Today, me and Nick here are going to be dissecting some of the moves made in free agency this week by the New York Giants at the wide receiver position. This news was kind of lost in the headlines because Myles Garrett and AJ Brown were traded the same day. But I think it's interesting what New York did here is they're trying to revitalize the receiving group that has really plagued them over the last couple of years. Malik Neighbors, of course, was a superstar right away as a first round draft pick, but he's coming off a significant leg injury. Darius Slayton's been a very respectable pass catcher that can get you 800 plus yards in a season as well. But this offseason, they've been very active. They already added Calvin Austin, Isaiah Likely at tight end, Darnell Mooney, I think, can come in and be a respectable slot for them as well. But just a couple of days ago, Nick, they went ahead and brought in Odell Beckham Jr., a guy who did not play last year. Of course, he was suspended a couple of games for violating the league's PED policy. This is a guy that back in 2014 through 2018 was elite for the Giants. He had 1,000 yards in 4 of his 5 seasons. The one where he didn't, he got hurt in, only played 4 games in that one. Had an up and down tenure as well, where he struggled with health with the Browns after that. And then he helped the Rams win a Super Bowl where he suffered another significant leg injury where he missed 2022. And I thought he was good for the Ravens, 865 yards and 3 scores back in 2023. He's far from an elite player, though, Nick. But I think what the Giants want to do is they want to bring in some veterans here. They want to bring in guys that can maybe be thrusted in 400 yard roles, and that's why they also brought in a possession pass catcher in Juju Smith-Schuster. He has not really capitalized off the success he had early in his career out of USC. He had a 1,400-yard campaign back in 2018. Then he had a couple of other solid years with the Steelers, that is. He was with the Patriots in 23, and then the Chiefs after that, where he didn't really contribute a whole lot. But these are still veterans, Nick, that I think can help offer something in some realm, right? If that's Neighbors still trying to learn, the new rookie Malachi Fields, who I think is going to be tremendous. Odd approach because a lot of these guys they picked up are, quote unquote, washed up receivers, right? And if that's where you're trying to get success for a young quarterback, that could be a problem. But I think in terms of the learning process, it might not be a bad idea at all for Jackson Dart.
For me, this is waving red flags immediately with the Giants offseason because I think if you're adding all these receivers, you have to be very concerned about Malik Neighbors' health. This wide receiver room without Neighbors is not a very strong one. Neighbors obviously is a great impactful player, really good, great wild card guy. He's a huge impactful player that will make things happen immediately. We saw that in 2024 where he had a pretty strong rookie season where he was able to go out there and put a ton of yards on the board, 1,200 yards to be exact. He had a ton of targets. He had 7 touchdowns, and he was starting off pretty strong in 2025, had 2 touchdowns through the first 4 games, had 275 yards receiving, and then he tore his ACL on the MetLife turf, which is known to lead to some harsh injuries. And I'm starting to fear that the Giants may believe that the injury is worse to Neighbors than originally expected. There was hopes that he would come back and be very productive this season, but coming off ACL injuries, especially when you're a player that relies on speed, it can be a huge detriment to kind of rehab from that. Now, I don't hate all these moves, but some of them are head scratching. The Odell move, it's a little bit of a head scratcher. Right? I feel like you're kind of trying to chase the magic of the previous years. And Odell, no disrespect, I loved him when he was a Giant. When I was younger, he was a phenomenal player. He had that incredible catch, obviously, against the Cowboys that everyone talks about. And he had, a lot of productive seasons there. The full seasons he played were all over 1,000 yards, including a season where he only played 12 games in 2018, still got over 1,000 yards in that season, had 300 yards before he got hurt in 2017. He showed some productivity still with the Browns, beg your pardon, but then it kind of fell off a little bit. He played a good role for the Rams, and I think that role was very important for the Rams. They needed a veteran in the locker room who could kind of smooth things out, be a key asset late in the season during a Super Bowl run. And obviously the injury after that was certainly a problem. But you don't really know what you're going to get with Odell coming back from these injuries and not playing a ton of football. Didn't play at all last year. Last time he played was for Miami in 2024. So I'm definitely questioning what that looks like. And then you look at Braxton Berrios. He hasn't really done anything of note besides dating a famous Instagram model and Alex Earl the last couple of years. Didn't really do anything at Miami or the Houston the last 2 years had four games last year for the Texans, only six the year prior to that for Miami. Maybe as a guy that they get involved in the return game, he showed some life in that in the past, had a couple multiple 100-yard seasons as a returner for the Jets and the Dolphins, but I'm not really entirely inspired by that move either. And then Juju Smith-Schuster, I think, is an interesting one where he has shown some solid potential in the past. The 2018 season for the Steelers was pretty productive, 1,400 yards receiving, 7 touchdowns in that one, but just kind of been downhill since then. A couple of non-productive seasons for the Chiefs and the New England Patriots. It's very interesting. I thought the moves earlier in the season were solid. Calvin Austin, Darnell Mooney, Malachi Fields. I like that draft pick. But these later moves have kind of been puzzling for me, and it seems like they're panicking a little bit in New Jersey, making moves that just don't seem to make a ton of sense for the vision of this team.
Like you said, Braxton Berrios, he's likely going to have, a role as a kick or a punt returner. I think he'll do very well in that regard. Biggest question mark is, are any of these guys going to make the roster, right? Because they still have to go through training camp and preseason and whatnot to make the roster. But I think they all will, because I think they're looking for a complete turnover in this group. They're just sick of what they've had the last couple of years. Jalen Hyatt has not really emerged. Bo Collins, I still think, is a guy they should give a fair opportunity to. Xavier Gibson in this room. He's also a guy that can compete as a kick return option. And you have Ryan Miller, who's just a kind of an aging veteran at this point. So I think these guys are actually going to make the roster, Nick, and that means you're going to be looking at about five guys here that they signed in free agency that are going to be making this roster. And Calvin Austin's just been an inconsistent player, someone that really did not take that next step in what was also a weak room for the Steelers. He had opportunities and didn't make the most of them. And that's kind of what you're seeing here, Nick. Guys just not really making the most of their opportunities. Darnell Mooney, been a very inconsistent player as well. Didn't play as good as I thought he could have last year, but in the past has shown some really good flashes as a downfield playmaker. And Juju Smith-Schuster, he's going to give you maybe 20 receptions, 300 yards on the year. And then OBJ, I don't know, how good he can be. I think his best football might be behind him. But like you said, it seems like they're going to try to recreate some of the magic. I think overall, though, having veteran presence in the room is never a bad thing. But it's very rare to see an NFL team take this approach, Nick, because typically you're trying to build for the draft. You're going to sign a free agent to a 1 year prove it deal like some of these other teams do. And they didn't do any of that. They're signing aging veterans to hopefully come in and add something to this room. And maybe it'll work, but I'm really not sure if it will. And so it's still going to be a work in progress. And like you said, Nick, if Neighbors he ends up not being as healthy as we would hope coming back from that terrible injury, they're going to be at a significant disadvantage because Malachi Fields, he's the next rookie up. He's a great downfield playmaker. He's got plenty of size, 6'5", 220-ish around there, but he's not a guy that's going to win with speed. He's not going to be a guy who wins underneath or with yards after catch like Neighbors can or Slayton can or even Mooney. So it's very interesting to see how this might play out. And overall, signing three guys on the same day, I think that implies that they're going to give them a fair shot. I think that at the end of the day, all of them are going to make the roster.
I agree with your assessment. I think all three will make the roster at the end of the day. I think Barrios will play a role in the kick return game. I think Juju Smith-Schuster can certainly carve out a role in the slot splitting time with Calvin Austin. I think you'll see Smith-Schuster get the start there and kind of be the number one guy in the slot early on for this team. I think Odell will make the roster purely because he is a veteran and purely because he has so much built up goodwill with this team. I think Jalen Hyatt, the experiment with him, I think is over. You don't want to say the preseason really has that much of an impact, but I think that drop against New England in the preseason last year really sealed his fate. It was a bad drop from a ball from Dart in the end zone. I think after that, everyone kind of knew that Jalen Hyatt, the experiment with him, is over and it's just not going to work out. Xavier Gibson, I don't know if he's going to make the roster necessarily. I thought I saw some progress with him, but still not entirely sure. I hope Bo Collins makes a roster. I think Bo Collins is a really talented player. You and I have both been pretty high on him. And I think he still has a lot of potential to kind of pull out there and really make something happen for this team as a depth piece. Ryan Miller, I don't know if he'll make the roster either. Isaiah Hodgson is also on this roster. We'll see if he ends up making it. Malachi Fields will be interesting as a younger guy that they drafted. I'm very curious to see what type of role he potentially carves out. If Neighbors is not healthy, maybe he'll get some more targets early on in the season. And Darnell Mooney, I'm very interested to see what that looks like. I actually kind of like that signing more than most people. I think Mooney can really still carve out a role for this team and complement Darius Slayton pretty well, who seems to be the only really bang-on guy that you're going to get consistent catches out of, consistent yards, and consistent minutes, as Slayton has been really good for this Giants team over the past 4 or 5 years or so and has been a consistent asset for this team overall. Again, red flags are flying for me, right? I feel like you don't make these moves if you aren't kind of nervous and panicking about Neighbors' outlook. I wonder what his health outlook fully is and if we'll see him play this year. I don't know at this point whether or not he's going to play this year or even play up to the level that we see with him in the past. The speed is going to be something you have to keep an eye on. And obviously, the MetLife turf continues to be a problem. You don't want to necessarily blame the turf for injuries, but we've seen the Jets and Giants both have issues at the MetLife turf. Obviously, the stadium is hosting the World Cup, important matches in the World Cup this summer. They're hosting the final there. They're hosting a semifinal, I believe, and some early group stage games. They completely removed the turf, put in a brand new field there, brand new grass field, because players, international players, coaches leveled some concerns with the field and the texture of the field, the type of field, things of that nature in East Rutherford. So again, it's something I'm concerned about because it could play a big impact. And the Giants, I think they have a great offensive roster on paper, but I'm worried about some of the injuries to Scadaboo. I'm worried about the injuries to Neighbors. I'm worried about if Dart can stay healthy, make sure he doesn't put himself into harm's way because that could really impact the long-term future and stability of this franchise. That is a great team on paper that may struggle with health and injuries throughout the 2026 and beyond.
That's me for today's episode. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.